Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of VectoScalar Tech Talk Show. I'm your host, Vikash Jain. VectoScalar Tech Talk is an online live show on technology and digital transformation shared by senior tech leaders and thought leaders. In this episode, we have an amazing guest with us. Derek Cheshire is going to cover the innovation, the art of science. Before calling Derek on stage, let me give you a brief about his background. Derek Cheshire is an innovationist, speaker, author, and sometimes called unusual innovation consultant. That's so interesting. He has spent over 40 years working in the industry, 20 of them on innovation project, asking awkward questions and being told that's the way we have always done things around here. Yeah, we all have heard those statements. Not satisfied with answers like this, Derek championed the use of creativity as a serious business tool and innovation to solve the world's wicked problems. He is the author of Creativity in Action and has had material published by ICFAI, University Press in India, the Change This organization, the United Nations, and others. More recently, Derek was appointed as visiting professor at VIT, University Business School, Chennai, India. He is also an assessor for the King's Award for Enterprise Innovation in the UK. And with that, I would like to invite Derek on the stage. Welcome, Derek, to the VectoScalar Tech Talk Show.
And here I am. That was easy, wasn't it?
Yeah,
I didn't even knock anything over to come on stage. That was easy.
that's great. And thanks for taking out time to being on the show. In case audience, it is for you. Whenever you have any question for Derek, you can type in the comment box below and we will be taking up those questions gradually. Do keep sharing your commendation and suggestion in the comment box below. Yeah. So Derek, you have a very interesting topic and your introduction itself is so interesting. So the title, is it ambiguous? That are you talking about individuals or organization? What is innovation?
The title was deliberately ambiguous, as you might guess, because it got a few people talking on LinkedIn. But some of the people that commented were actually saying innovation is this, and they mixed it with creativity, and they said they were thinking about creative thinking and individuals, and that's part of it. But what I like to think of is innovation for organizations, whole businesses, whole organizations to be innovative. So it's the sum of the parts rather than fiddling with the individual parts. So when I try and talk about innovation, yes, I love these workshops where you can work with people individually, but what I try and do is work with effectively the top teams to and make changes that go all the way through. So as we discussed earlier, your 100-year-old company, you need to change the attitudes and behaviors of the whole company, not just maybe the guy who, I don't know, makes widgets on his lathe or sweeps the floor or whatever. So yes, I'm talking about whole organizations. That was a very long-winded way of answering the question, I'm afraid.
No, that was interesting. And probably before the podcast, I was referring to some other company which is 100 years old. VectoScalar is around 11 years old right now, right? Yeah. So that's an interesting observation that you actually talk to individuals, but that's how an organization is some total of individuals only. So at the end of the day, they are going to get transformed through your work. So when we talk about art or science, what is the difference between art and science? So, and innovation, is it actually an art or science, or what is your reasoning?
It is both, which is deliberately designed to confuse listeners as well. But if you're talking about innovation at a low level, the level most people might think of, which is, you mentioned earlier, design thinking, design sprints, and all of those things, that's I wouldn't quite call it science, but they're scientific methods. They're things you can replicate over and over and over again. But if you talk about innovation as a whole for an organization, it gets very difficult. People say, what do you mean? They have different viewpoints. So one of the reasons why people don't get started with innovation is because they're scared. They can't get a handle on the risks. Then there's all this stuff about we can't manage what we can measure. How are we going to do this? And so much gets added in. The people in the boardroom are overloaded with information, and they just never get started. So what I did, and a lot of people seem to be doing it almost subconsciously, is almost switch to the art side, to use things like metaphors. And the reason for using a metaphor isn't simply because I like metaphors and those sort of arty things, but it's a way of putting a wrap around it. So if you say, I want the sort of culture that is like, I don't know, a mug of hot chocolate. That's a silly example, but
Okay.
you can get the idea that it's comforting, it's warm, everybody wants it. You can use your metaphor, choose your metaphors a bit more appropriately than that, but it puts a wrap around it, so you know what the culture's like. You can do the same for the structure and the attitudes and behaviors within an organization, and the people at the top of an organization can talk about these things. So that's why it is both art and science. So at the very top, strategically, it's actually art,
Okay.
but tactically, it's science.
So that's a interesting observation that actually it's both in depending on the context. And while
Yeah.
we take further question, I have one question coming from the audience. So here is Saddam Hussein is asking, how do technology and digital tools impact the way we approach innovation, blurring the lines between art and science? So what is the role of technology and digital tools in innovation?
Tools themselves generally, actually digital tools in particular, are or can be a big problem for innovation, because I don't know what the state of play is within all companies within India, but what happens is when, certainly in the UK and other European Western countries, when we talk about change and transformation, people go, crikey, we need to computerize something. And the leap is towards digital tools, and some people don't explore the solutions. They don't find out that what some of the problems were before leaping in, and they just go for technology and digital tools. And so the chances are you might just make things faster if you employ technology, but you might not actually do the right things. So yes, we need these tools, but I think we need to be a bit more careful about which ones we use and how we use them effectively. In an ideal world, I think what you would do is you have a toolbox with all these tools in, a bit like, when a tradesman comes to your house. They look at the job, they say, right, okay, I know what needs to be done. I'll pick out my hammer and my screwdriver, my chisel, my saw, or whatever, and they pick out the right tools, rather than, because I used to work in software, and what tended to happen was that because you had invested in a suite of tools, you had to use those every time, and they just forced your way of thinking. So I think we need to be very, very careful, because if you pick the tools first, they will force you down a particular path. But if you choose that path and pick the appropriate tools, you're much better off.
That's an insightful line, that first choose the path and then probably pick up the tools which are relevant to that path. And the path to innovation is definitely interesting. And while we talk about tools and technology that is there, you have worked in India, as you, it was mentioned in the introduction. You are a visiting professor at VIT, and you must have worked with Indian clients as well and UK. So, how do you see the inclination toward innovation in eastern part of the world in India, or here countries here versus the western part of the world? Any correlation?
It's interesting because, I mean, obviously there are some cultural differences, but I think there's a big difference in India between, I won't say young and old, I will just say younger and older people. I mean, for instance, an example of just one example I came across whilst in Chennai. Nearly every student on the campus had their own little side hustle as a business, from baking cakes to I know, supplying car parts in some cases. And so, I mean, not necessarily very innovative, but the fact that they'd started it up and it lasted, they'd done the research, that was very, very good. And some people were considering, after leaving university, going on with these businesses. And but step in parents. If the student's female, no, find yourself a nice boy, get married. If they're male, then it's a case of find yourself a safe job, get a car, find a wife. And it's the really, I wouldn't say entrepreneurial or even bolshy ones, but the people who stand up, shall we say, for themselves, who get stuff going. But that said, the people who are starting up businesses are actually very, 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 very clever, very able to solve problems with very, very little, in fact, which is interesting. Why some people go for tools and technology, because what you see in India and in Africa is people solving problems with very little. So that
Okay.
ingenuity is there, and that's what needs to come before all the tools. Another example of this was, I know in Chennai they did a lot of work on the Internet of Things, IoT, and that was great. But it was for the sake of it. They didn't seem to know what it was they were going to use it for. Whereas at the same time in Europe, they were basing their smart city ideas on IoT. Another example was drone technology.
Okay.
I mean, there's a lot in India, but in the early days, there was a lot of talk about just manufacturing drones, making bigger drones, better drones, able to carry bigger payloads. But at that time in the West, they were using them to create light shows in the sky. Now everybody catches up eventually, but it's just that way of thinking. The focusing on the tools, doing it because you can, rather than saying, what problems can we solve here? Because the ingenuity is there, definitely.
That's interesting. So probably we need to be more creative on the eastern part of the world to use those innovation effectively in the businesses and the
Yeah,
problems that we are going to solve.
taking it back to basics, all it
Yeah.
really is find a problem to solve. Yeah, and you will find a market for it if there is a problem to solve.
Yeah, and without the pressure of getting married, that should not come
Without
in
the
the path
pressure
to.
yeah, well, there are some cultural issues which can get in the way, but
And it's interesting that we have another follow-up question coming from Saddam on the similar topic, that how do cultural and societal factors influence the perception of innovation as an art or science in different region or communities? So you just mentioned that there are some differences, but any interesting story with your experience in any part of the world where you found certain innovation specific to certain community or something like that?
I'm just trying to think about community
Yeah.
stuff, because I've done stuff in Mexico and in Central Africa as well. I'm just trying to think of some amusing stories, because I like amusing things, but I can't really think of anything amusing. But I was just
Yeah.
thinking back to my time in Malawi. Did some work for the British Council there,
Okay.
and I was talking with the financial director of, I can't remember which of the two banks it was, one of the two biggest banks in Malawi anyway. And she just said, well, this is all very interesting, but I don't see how we can use it.
Okay.
And it wasn't difficult to see how you could use it, but there was just something between her and going ahead, because, as you know, banks are very heavily regulated, but the regulation only covers the interface between the bank and its customers. It doesn't cover how you work internally. So you can actually, yeah, it's a bit like having a computer that, on the face of it, works, appears 10 times faster than anything else. But you open the box, and what you've got is, you haven't got a processor. Somebody's put an extra mouse or hamster in, and the wheel's going quicker. It doesn't matter what's inside; it's what's outside that actually matters. And that was a big turning point. But I was just thinking, an example of ingenuity, and I know it goes on in India because I've seen it, but this was an example from Africa. Most people who've changed their bicycle tire will realize at times how difficult it is. You scrape your knuckles, the tire levers ping off and hit you in the face. It's quite difficult. Um, but can you imagine changing a car tire without the tools that you have in a garage, just using tire levers, screwdrivers, and soapy water? That is difficult in itself. But
Okay.
I actually witnessed teenage boys change truck tires like that. They developed a way to change truck tires without using all the tools and machinery that you find in a normal garage or auto shop. And these extraordinary things happen everywhere. So
Okay. So there are different communities. There are definitely some genuine creativity
yeah,
and innovation, and we just need an eye to keep observing it and applying in our business. Right?
indeed, I think ingenuity is alive the world over, and in fact,
Yeah.
where in India and Southeast Asia and Africa, where you actually have an advantage over the West, is your education system, because too many people have adopted an education system like ours in the UK, and what it does is it educates creativity out of people. Then we start off, we play, we wave sticks around. These are swords and guns, and we go and hide inside cardboard boxes, and our imagination runs riot. Then we go to school, and we are it's very heavy emphasis on passing exams. So the creativity is educated out of us, and then later
Okay.
on, we go to a company to work, and what happens? We have to go on courses to learn to be creative, which is silly.
Yes.
In certain cultures, that hasn't happened. Cultures that use storytelling, cultures that use metaphor, are are much more able to innovate, given the right help and conditions.
Okay. Okay, that's interesting. We have another question coming from Bhavna. Bhavna Mia is asking that how do we mitigate risk involved in innovation? So any risk involved with innovation as well,
Um,
and how do we mitigate?
in a way, there is zero risk with innovation, although people will go, "What? That's not true." If you stand at the beginning of the innovation path, you might say, "Oh, there are risks," but risk, unless you're about to leap off a big cliff, there's not a risk. You first of all, you can reduce the risk by just knowing more. The more you know, the less risk there is. So doing something blindly is not good, but learning more about what you're doing will help to remove the risk. The other thing to do, and I know some people say that failure is good. Failure actually isn't good. We don't want to fail, but it's the people who are afraid to fail and don't put in place processes to handle that failure that really do fail. Because the people who actually learn from it, move on, and go again, they're the people that successful. And I suggest that anybody listening, if you haven't already had a look, go and find. There's a website. It's the Museum of Failure, and
That's
it's got
interesting.
and it's got all the examples of things that companies have done badly. But the companies are still here. They're big companies. Companies like Coca-Cola and things like that. They're huge companies. They just learned and moved on. So, but yeah, find out as much as you can and put something in place, because if you spend all your time analyzing and not really starting anything because you're afraid, then you won't fail, but you won't get anywhere either. So
Okay, that's interesting, and it's for viewers. Whenever you want to contact Derek, there is a website which is shown down below. You can refer to that website and visit his work and see the depth of the work that he has done. Now, I'll move on to the next question, which is more regarding that. What is your number one tip for a successful innovation project or program?
the number one tip for a successful innovation project: know why you're doing it. It's actually quite simple. If you know why you're doing it, it makes things a lot simpler. It goes back to my original thing about having a problem. If you identify a problem, then it's very easy to solve it and innovate. But if you're going to set up an innovation project or program, then you have to have a problem and know why you're doing it. Do you want to make somebody's life better in some way? Do you want to make uh, a more ecological fridge or freezer or something like that? What is it you want to do? Do you want to make transport run faster? Do you want to create drinking water from whatever? I mean, what is it you actually want to do? In fact, I'm right in the middle of judging the Innovation Awards here in the UK, and there are some great examples of this, and the applications are created in such a way that they have to say what the problem is they're solving. And if people are just being very woolly and wishy-washy about the problem they're solving, then they don't get an award. They don't get anywhere. But people are generating power with clean hydrogen. That's a big thing. Um,
Okay, That's
so
that's an interesting insight. So we have commendation coming from Nikhil Agarwal, who is the CEO of VectoScalar Technologies. That thank you for wonderful insights that you have shared. So I'll probably just pick up the last question. I understand the consideration of time. So which will be around that impact of artificial intelligence and machine learning. I think that's these two are big buzzwords, especially the role of generative AI. So, what do you see where these technologies are going to lead the industry?
yeah, I I don't think they're going to. They don't think they're going to take over, but they do have an important part to play. I mean, it's still AI is still in early days. People say, look at all the clever things we can do with it." Yes, but the trained eye can spot something that's been generated by AI. Um, but a lot of people are thinking about using AI to create pictures to do their job applications. But I think the really clever use for AI is in algorithms that learn. So,
Okay.
for instance, you might have something that, I don't know, it controls the traffic lights in the center of a city, but it's instead of us having to program it, it just knows when traffic's busy, when there are queues building up, and it will automatically start changing all the traffic light sequences. So it makes that sort of thing easier. I came across an example in the financial services industry just yesterday, no, a couple of days ago. And basically, when people here in the UK, when their business wants a loan, they've got to they apply, they fill in forms. Then an underwriter is involved, and the underwriter works out the risks, and then they say, "Yeah, we'll decide on we'll give you a decision," and they get the money. But first of all, people don't always get the money they want. And secondly, it takes up to 4 days to get the money, which is important for a small business. Now that decision is made in 3 seconds,
Yeah.
and the money is there within an hour. So those are the sorts of things it's going to do. It's back to technology again. It can enhance, but it's not necessarily the reason for doing something. So
That's
I think
an
those are the sorts of things that's where it's going to really help
okay.
with
That's
decision
an
making.
yeah, yeah. That I totally agree that so many innovations are happening, and we just need to crack and keep a track on those innovation. So, any last message before we end today's VectoScalar Tech Talk show? Any last message
Um,
for the audience?
I would argue have words with your educators, because it's the people who are at school, college, and university now who are really, in 10 years' time they're going to be at the forefront of this climate change, everything. So invest in the education of the people of the future is what I'd say, and forget about old folks like me.
That's an interesting insight, and we should keep our future leaders ready to take up the innovation the way we
Indeed.
want to see it. Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Derek, for being on the show, and thanks, audience, for being such a humble audience, for being live on the show and sharing all the comments and commendation. Thanks again. See you next week with another VectoScalar Tech Talk show with another thought leaders. Till that time, see ya. Have a nice day ahead.